The old house buzzed with the noise of a rushed departure, doors slamming, drawers yanked open, boxes stacked high, and footsteps echoing across the creaky wooden floor. Outside, the moving truck hummed, its back open like a gaping mouth waiting to be fed with the last bits of a family's life. Amid the chaos, no one noticed the small boy standing quietly in the hallway, clutching a worn-out stuffed dog to his chest. Ethan was only 9, but his eyes held a heaviness beyond his years. He stood barefoot, dressed in pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt, watching as his adoptive mother taped shut another box without glancing in his direction. His father barked orders to the movers outside, his tone short, clipped, and impatient. There was no laughter, no nostalgic talk of memories shared in the house, no words of reassurance to the child now watching them like a stranger in his own home. He cleared his throat softly. "Do I pack my things now?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the chaos. His mother paused for half a second. "Go wait in your room," she muttered without looking at him. "We'll get to your stuff later." Ethan nodded and turned away slowly, walking down the hallway to his room with dragging steps. He shut the door behind him and sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the stuffed dog tighter. The room looked untouched. None of his toys were packed. His books still sat neatly on the shelf. No boxes. No suitcases. Just silence, and the distant sound of boxes being loaded into the truck. He waited. 10 minutes passed. 20. The sounds from the living room grew quieter. He strained to hear anything, his name being called, someone climbing the stairs, the rustling of cardboard near his door. But there was nothing. He opened the door slightly and peeked out. The hallway was empty now. The pictures on the wall had been taken down, leaving pale outlines on the wallpaper. He stepped out slowly, heart pounding. He walked to the top of the stairs. "Mom," he called softly. No answer. He descended the stairs, one hand gripping the rail, the other still holding his stuffed dog. The living room was barren, no couch, no chairs, no coffee table. Just dust outlines where furniture used to be. The kitchen lights were off. The back door was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. He stepped outside and looked around. The truck was gone. The driveway was empty. He stood there, barefoot on the cold concrete, staring at the empty space where the truck had been. His lips trembled. He turned in slow circles, searching, hoping to see someone behind a tree or stepping out from the side of the house, saying it was a mistake or a test or some kind of joke. But no one came. He walked back inside and closed the door. The click of the latch echoed through the house like a final decision. He sat down on the bottom stair, pulling his knees to his chest. They had left. They had really left. For the first hour, he sat frozen, unable to cry, unable to move. His mind struggled to understand, to justify. Maybe they forgot. Maybe they were coming back. Maybe they thought he was in the car and he somehow slipped away. That had to be it. He should wait. Yes, that was the smart thing to do. Just wait. He got up and filled a glass of water. He sat by the window, eyes scanning the street, watching each passing car with desperate hope. But none of them stopped. Night started to fall, casting long shadows across the room. Still, he waited. But deep down, something was breaking. The way they hadn't packed any of his things. The way they never looked him in the eye. The way his name wasn't called even once as they left. It hadn't been a mistake. And as the last light drained from the sky and the house settled into a silence deeper than anything he had ever known, Ethan finally let the tears come. Not loud sobs, just silent streams down his cheeks. His stuffed dog soaked up what his shirt couldn't. They weren't coming back. The house had grown unnaturally quiet. Not the soft, comforting kind of quiet that meant peace, but the hollow, abandoned kind, where silence echoed louder than any sound. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, knees pulled to his chest, the same stuffed dog in his arms. He had waited long enough. It was time to check. His small feet touched the cold wooden floor, and he padded slowly to the door. He hesitated for a second, hoping he would hear something, a voice calling his name, the hum of the truck reversing into the driveway, his mother's impatient footsteps. But there was nothing, just a long, empty stillness. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The light was dimmer now, the sun beginning to dip below the trees outside. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards. The hallway, once alive with activity, was stripped bare. The only sound was the creak of the floor beneath his feet as he tiptoed toward the stairs. "Mom," He called, voice trembling. No answer. Dad. Only silence. He moved faster now, heart starting to pound. Maybe they were in the garage. Maybe something happened. Maybe they were waiting outside. He ran down the stairs, his bare feet slapping against the wood. The living room greeted him like a cold museum, completely empty. No furniture, no pictures, not even a forgotten box. Only a few faint scuff marks remained on the floor where the coffee table used to sit. He crossed the living room to the kitchen. The cabinets were all open, most of them empty except for a lone plastic cup and a half-used sponge. The fridge door stood ajar, its light flickering. Nothing inside. Hello, he said louder now, panic creeping into his voice. He hurried to the front door and yanked it open. Nothing. No truck. No car. No parents standing on the sidewalk waving for him to come along. Just the evening breeze rustling through the trees and the low hum of distant traffic. The world moved on without noticing him. Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The driveway was completely empty. The neighbors' houses were quiet, some with lights beginning to flicker on as families settled in for the evening. He looked around, hoping for any sign. Maybe they'd left a note, or they were just around the corner, coming back for him. But the only thing waiting for him was the stillness of an ending. He walked back inside slowly. This time he closed the front door gently. The sound it made was soft, final. He leaned his back against it and slid down until he was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest again. The reality settled over him like a heavy blanket. They were gone. Not lost. Not delayed. Not playing a cruel trick. Gone. He thought about the way his mom had avoided his eyes when he asked about packing. The way his dad had ignored him completely. The way no one came to get him. The way not a single one of his toys, books, or clothes had been touched. They had decided to leave him behind. His heart ached with something sharp, something deep. It wasn't just sadness, it was rejection, confusion, and fear all tangled together in a knot too big for a 9-year-old to understand. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. His body felt numb. He stood up again and wandered aimlessly around the house. He peeked into the master bedroom, bare. The bathroom, emptied. The guest room, nothing. His footsteps echoed in every corner now, like he was the last person alive. Finally, he returned to his room and shut the door behind him. It felt safer in there, even though the truth had already followed him in. He crawled back into bed. Without turning on the light. Darkness crept in through the window as the last sliver of daylight disappeared. The room felt colder than before, the silence heavier. He hugged his stuffed dog tightly, burying his face in its soft fabric. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they would remember. Maybe someone would come. But deep inside, Ethan knew. No one was coming tonight. And maybe not tomorrow either. Night fell quickly, as if the sky had dropped a curtain over the world and left Ethan alone in the middle of a forgotten stage. Darkness seeped into every corner of the house, and without the soft glow of a nightlight or the familiar sounds of someone else breathing nearby, the silence became unbearable. Every creak in the walls, every distant howl of the wind outside made him flinch. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time, staring at the closed door, afraid that if he opened it again, the house would somehow feel even emptier than before. His stomach rumbled. He hadn't eaten since lunch, a half-hearted sandwich that felt like days ago. He slowly stood up and tiptoed down the stairs, careful not to make any noise, though there was no one left awake. The kitchen was cold. The tile under his feet was icy, and his breath fogged slightly in the air. He opened the fridge again, hoping something might have magically appeared since earlier. Still empty. A lonely half-used ketchup bottle sat on one shelf like a relic. He closed the door and turned to the pantry. The shelves were mostly bare, but in the back corner he found a small pack of crackers, half opened. He sat down on the floor right there, pulling his knees to his chest and slowly nibbling at the crackers. The crumbs stuck to his fingers and lips, and he tried to stretch the last cracker out as long as he could, like it might buy him more time, more hope. When he finished, he licked his fingers clean, wiped them on his shirt, and stood up again. The wind outside rattled one of the windows in the living room, and Ethan quickly backed into the hallway, heart racing. He didn't want to be near the windows. Something about them made him feel exposed, like if the night could see him, it might decide to come inside. He climbed the stairs again, skipping the third step, which always creaked the loudest. But he didn't go back to his room. Instead, he opened the narrow hallway door to the small storage space under the staircase. It was dusty and smelled faintly of wood and old paint, but it was quiet. Safe. Enclosed. He crawled inside, dragging a worn blanket with him, and shut the door most of the way, leaving only a sliver of light from the hallway. There was a small pile of old pillows in the corner, and he arranged them into something resembling a nest. Then he curled up, pulling the blanket over himself and clutching his stuffed dog to his chest. He tried to hum softly to himself, the same tune his foster mom used to sing when she tucked him in at night, back when she still tucked him in at all. But the melody caught in his throat. It didn't feel right anymore. The wind outside howled again, louder this time, and he buried his face deeper into the pillow. A sudden creak echoed from somewhere in the house, and his whole body tensed. For a moment, he held his breath, imagining footsteps coming up the stairs. A door opening. Someone calling his name, but it was nothing. Just the old house settling. Just him. Alone. Tears finally came, not in sobs or loud crying, but slow, steady drops that soaked into the pillow beneath his cheek. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, too tired and too scared to stop them. Every part of him ached, not just his body, but the quiet, invisible place where love was supposed to live. It felt hollow now. Time passed, though he didn't know how much. Minutes. Maybe hours. The night stretched on endlessly. He whispered to the stuffed dog, pretending it could hear him. They didn't mean to. They just forgot me. That's all. Maybe they'll come back in the morning. They'll realize I'm not there. But even as he said it, his voice broke with doubt. The wind outside quieted. The house went still. Wrapped in the blanket, surrounded by dust and darkness, Ethan finally drifted into a light, restless sleep. His breathing slowed. The fear didn't leave him, but it dulled enough for his body to shut down. The boy was still. The house was still. And the night went on. The sun had returned after several cloudy days, casting soft golden light over the quiet suburban street. Birds chirped in the trees, the world beginning to move forward again as if nothing had changed. A gray sedan slowly rolled into the driveway of the vacant house, its engine purring gently before it was shut off. The driver's side door opened, and a man in his late 30s stepped out, stretching after the long drive. He wore jeans and a worn brown jacket, and he looked up at the house with a mixture of curiosity and fatigue. Not bad, he murmured to himself, fishing the keys out of his pocket. His name was Daniel Harper, a schoolteacher who had just signed a lease for the place. After years of noisy apartments and crowded buildings, he'd finally decided it was time to live somewhere quiet, somewhere with space to breathe. This house had come cheap, surprisingly cheap, in fact. The landlord mentioned the previous owners had moved out in a rush. Daniel didn't ask too many questions. He liked his privacy, and he respected others too. He opened the trunk and pulled out a few boxes, setting them just inside the front door before stepping into the living room. Dust floated in the light streaming through the window. The house smelled of emptiness, like old wood, cardboard, and something faintly sour, like forgotten food. He wrinkled his nose slightly. Could use some fresh air, he muttered, cracking a window open. The hinges squeaked in protest. As he walked through the rooms, Daniel made mental notes: fix that loose doorknob, change the bulbs in the hallway, sweep out the corners. The place was livable, but it had clearly been left in a hurry. Some cabinet doors hung open. A lone child's shoe lay in the corner of what must have once been a kid's room. He picked it up, staring at it for a moment before gently setting it aside. The upstairs hallway creaked under his steps. The walls were bare, the nails still in place where pictures had once hung. He paused at one of the doors and opened it slowly. A small bedroom, clearly a child's, stood still, strangely preserved. A few books remained on the shelf. A faded drawing was taped to the wall, crayon stick figures under a yellow sun. His eyes narrowed slightly. They really did leave in a rush, he said under his breath. Something about the room gave him pause, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was how intact it was, compared to the rest of the house. Maybe it was the odd chill in the air. He stepped back and closed the door, making a mental note to give the room a deeper clean later. Back downstairs, Daniel started to unpack, stacking a few dishes in the kitchen, plugging in his coffee maker, organizing some books in the living room. As he moved around, a strange feeling tugged at him, like the house was watching him. Not in a threatening way, but as if it were holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of person he was. A soft thump sounded upstairs. He froze. His eyes flicked toward the ceiling. He waited, holding still. Nothing. He let out a small laugh, shaking his head. Old house noises. Come on, Dan, get a grip. Still, he couldn't help but glance toward the staircase. There was something oddly unsettled about the house. Not haunted, not spooky, just unsettled, as if something hadn't quite finished. He climbed the stairs again, more slowly this time. Each creak beneath his feet sounded louder now. He opened the bedroom door he'd visited earlier. Everything was still, except the closet door was slightly ajar. He was sure it had been closed before. He walked over and pushed it open all the way. The closet was dark, filled with dust and a faint smell of old fabric. Nothing out of the ordinary. He stepped back, closing it gently again. Get some sleep, Dan, he said to himself, rubbing his face. You've been driving too long. Downstairs once more, he unpacked a sleeping bag on the couch. He'd bring the bed in tomorrow. Tonight, he just needed rest. As he settled down and the room grew dim with dusk, the house seemed to settle with him. But far above, behind the thin wall of a closet, a small boy held his breath, still hidden in the shadows, too afraid to make a sound. He hadn't moved since the car pulled in. He didn't know who the man was. All he knew was he wasn't supposed to be seen. The night deepened, and the house shifted into its usual nocturnal stillness, that peculiar kind of quiet that amplifies even the softest sounds. Daniel lay on the living room couch, wrapped in his sleeping bag, one arm under his head and the other draped over his chest. The faint light of a table lamp flickered gently beside him, casting long, thin shadows across the empty walls. He had unpacked only the essentials, some dishes, a few clothes, his old radio, and a half-read paperback. The rest would wait until morning. The house creaked occasionally, wood contracting with the cooling air. Daniel had chalked it up to old age. It didn't bother him, not really. But sometime after midnight, just as he was drifting into a light sleep, a sharp noise jolted him fully awake. Footsteps. Upstairs. Not the kind of noise the house made on its own, but distinct, careful steps, soft, but unmistakable. He sat up, holding his breath, listening. Silence. Then another step. And another. He stood slowly, his heart thudding. Maybe a raccoon had found its way in. Or a squirrel. But those sounded like scurrying. This was too deliberate, too human. He grabbed the flashlight from the box near the couch and clicked it on, its beam cutting a narrow path through the dim room. He didn't call out. Something about the sound made him cautious, alert in a way he hadn't been in years. Slowly, he made his way to the stairs, the wooden steps groaning quietly beneath him as he climbed. When he reached the hallway, the air felt colder. He aimed the flashlight toward the doors, each one closed except for the last on the left. The small bedroom. The door was cracked open, just enough to see a sliver of the room inside. He approached slowly, the beam trembling slightly in his hand. His breath was shallow. He pushed the door open with the back of his hand. The room was empty. The same faint smell of dust and time. He stepped inside, the flashlight beam moving over the shelves, the small desk, the old drawing still taped to the wall. He paused, taking it in again. Something about the figures, the way one child stood far apart from the others, gave him a strange chill. Then a noise behind him. A soft click. He spun around. The closet door, once closed, was now open. Just a few inches. He hadn't touched it. His mouth went dry. Hello, he said quietly, his voice low, steady. No answer. He stepped forward and pulled the closet door open all the way. Empty. Or so it seemed. He shined the light into the corners, along the floor, behind the shelf. There was nothing, but the feeling that someone had just been there lingered, thick in the air. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. Must be losing it, he mumbled, closing the closet. Still uneasy, Daniel backed out of the room and gently pulled the door shut behind him. He returned to the hallway, flashlight still in hand, and made his way back down the stairs. The quiet had returned, but it no longer felt peaceful. Back on the couch, he kept the flashlight nearby. He lay down again, but sleep didn't come easily. He listened, carefully. For a while, there was nothing but the low hum of wind outside and the occasional creak of floorboards settling. Then, just as his eyelids began to droop again, another sound. A faint, muffled noise, as if someone was breathing just behind a wall. He sat up once more. But he didn't move this time. He stared up at the ceiling, trying to convince himself it was just an echo of his imagination, stirred by the unfamiliar house, the exhaustion, the stress of moving. He told himself he would check the attic tomorrow. He told himself it was probably the house adjusting to the weather. He told himself there was no one here but him. But above him, in the narrow dark space of the closet, a frightened boy remained hidden, his back pressed to the wall, barely daring to breathe. He had heard the man's voice, seen the light from the crack under the closet door. He didn't know if the man was kind or cruel. He only knew the last people who found him had smiled to his face, and then disappeared without goodbye. So he stayed quiet, like he had for days. Because silence had become the only safety he trusted. Morning came slowly, sunlight filtering through dusty windows and casting soft beams across the hardwood floor. The house, so quiet and uncertain at night, looked almost normal in the daylight. Daniel stirred on the couch, blinking awake as warmth from the rising sun touched his face. He rubbed his eyes and sat up, groaning as he stretched his stiff back. It had been a restless night, filled with strange dreams and faint, unsettling noises that he had convinced himself were just part of moving into an old house. He stood, ran a hand through his hair, and shuffled into the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the space with its rich, familiar aroma. Daniel leaned against the counter, sipping from his mug and staring out the window at the empty street. Something still felt off. He couldn't quite explain it, but it tugged at him, something incomplete, something waiting. He decided to resume unpacking. The faster he made this place feel like home, the sooner he'd shake the feeling. He returned upstairs, intending to clean out the small bedroom, the one that had disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. As he reached the top step, he paused. The door was open again. He was certain he had shut it last night. Daniel walked cautiously to the room and pushed the door all the way open. Sunlight streamed in, landing across the floor. Everything looked the same as before, quiet, undisturbed, still. But something caught his eye. A blanket, slightly balled up and tucked low in the closet, barely visible from where he stood. He stepped closer. It looked too fresh to be forgotten. Then it moved. Just a small shift. A twitch. His heart jolted in his chest. He blinked and stepped forward slowly, each footfall silent. He knelt beside the closet and gently pulled the door the rest of the way open. There, curled into the corner, was a boy. Thin, pale, eyes wide and terrified. His hair was messy, his face streaked with dried tears and smudges of dust. He clutched a small stuffed animal tightly to his chest, as if letting go would make everything disappear. For a second, neither of them moved. The boy stared at Daniel with wild, desperate eyes, like a trapped animal. Daniel froze, overwhelmed by the shock of what he was seeing. "It's okay," he said softly, his voice low, calm. "Hey, it's okay." The boy didn't answer. His lips quivered, and he shrank further into the corner of the closet, pulling the blanket up like a shield. Daniel sat down gently on the floor, making sure to keep some distance. He placed the flashlight, still clutched in his hand from the night before, down beside him. His heart was racing, but he forced himself to breathe slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I didn't know anyone was here. You scared me half to death, kiddo." The boy trembled but didn't speak. His fingers tightened around the stuffed animal. Daniel looked at him carefully. He was no more than 9 or 10. Too small to be out here alone. Too scared to have broken in. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. "What's your name?" Daniel asked gently. "Still nothing. I'm Daniel. I just moved in yesterday." "This used to be your house, didn't it?" The boy blinked slowly. A tear slid down his cheek. Then, finally, a whisper, "They left me." Daniel's throat tightened. "Who left you?" The boy's voice cracked. "My parents. They moved, and they didn't take me. They said they'd come back. But they didn't." Daniel felt his chest sink. He looked at the boy again, really looked, and understood the depth of that fear, the days he must have spent alone, hiding, waiting. "How long have you been here?" The boy shook his head. "I don't know. I was scared. I didn't want anyone to find me. I thought, if I stayed quiet, they'd come back." Daniel took a long breath. He didn't know what to say that could make something like that okay. So he didn't try. Instead, he stood slowly and extended his hand. "You don't have to hide anymore. I promise. The boy looked at the hand for a long time. Then, slowly, cautiously, he reached out and took it. His fingers were ice cold. Daniel gently helped him to his feet. You hungry? He asked. The boy nodded, just barely. Come on, Daniel said. Let's get you something to eat. And together, they stepped out of the closet, one afraid, the other determined, not knowing yet that something like healing had just begun. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft clink of a spoon against a bowl. Ethan sat at the small table, hunched over a bowl of cereal, eating slowly, as though still unsure if it was really okay to be there. His eyes kept flicking toward the doorway, toward the hallway, toward Daniel, anywhere but at the food in front of him. Daniel watched from across the kitchen, pretending to be busy with dishes, but he was really studying the boy. Every move Ethan made was cautious, guarded, like a deer that might bolt at the slightest sound. It had been an hour since Daniel found him in the closet. An hour of silence broken only by a few whispered words and the sound of cereal being poured into a bowl. Ethan hadn't asked for anything. Hadn't smiled. Hadn't even looked him in the eye for more than a second. But he'd come out of the closet. That was something. Daniel poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from the boy. The silence stretched between them like a fragile thread. You sleep at all last night? He asked gently. Ethan gave a slight shrug. Daniel hesitated, then spoke again. How long were you here by yourself? Ethan picked at the rim of his bowl. A few days. Maybe more. Daniel nodded slowly, trying to hide the anger brewing inside. Not at Ethan, but at the people who had done this to him. Left him alone. Abandoned like an old piece of furniture they no longer wanted. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his voice steady. I need to call someone, he said. Someone who can help. Immediately, Ethan's spoon stopped. His body tensed. He looked up, eyes wide and filled with sudden panic. No, he whispered. Ethan, no. The boy pushed the bowl away and stood up so fast the chair screeched backward. They'll take me back. To the home. I don't want to go back. Daniel stood too, slowly, hands raised in a calming gesture. Hey, it's okay. I'm not sending you anywhere, I need to let someone know you're here. You've been missing. People are probably looking for you. No one's looking for me, Ethan said bitterly. No one cares. They said they'd take care of me forever. Then they just left. Daniel's heart cracked at the sound of those words. There was a rawness in Ethan's voice, something deeper than a tantrum or fear. It was grief. Betrayal. A boy who had been promised love and was handed loneliness instead. He sat back down slowly. Okay. No one's going to take you anywhere today. You're safe here. I just want to understand. Do you know their names? Your parents? Ethan nodded slowly, tears starting to form in his eyes. David and Claire Foster. They said they wanted a quiet kid. I tried to be quiet. Daniel swallowed hard. Did they ever hurt you? No. Ethan shook his head. They just stopped talking to me. They said I was too much. That they couldn't deal with it. Then one day they started packing, and they told me to stay in my room. I thought it was just for a little while. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table, heart heavy. You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan. You hear me? Nothing. What they did was wrong. You didn't deserve that. Ethan sniffled, wiping his nose on his sleeve. I don't want to go back to a group home. Daniel looked at the boy, skinny, scared, but still holding on to something inside. Hope, maybe. Or the desperate need to believe someone, somewhere, might choose him and not change their mind. I'm not going to send you back. I don't know what comes next yet, but I'm not letting you disappear. Ethan looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly, testing the words. Why are you being nice to me? Daniel didn't have a rehearsed answer. He looked down at his coffee, then back at the boy. Because someone should have been, and because you deserve better than this. The boy said nothing, but his shoulders dropped a little. A bit of the stiffness left his posture. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the first tiny step toward it. Daniel stood and gently placed a hand on the back of Ethan's chair. Finish eating. Then maybe we can figure out what to do next. Together. Ethan sat again, pulled his bowl back toward him, and started eating once more. Slower this time, but more certain. The silence between them wasn't so heavy anymore. A soft breeze fluttered through the open kitchen window, carrying with it the smell of fresh morning air and birdsong from the trees outside. Sunlight poured in gently, bathing the small kitchen in a warm, golden hue. The room was still modest, just a simple table, two mismatched chairs, a faded checkered curtain hanging over the sink, but something had changed. The quiet had changed. The house, once filled with a cold and empty silence, now held life. Ethan sat at the table, swinging his legs slightly beneath the chair as he concentrated on pouring syrup over a plate of pancakes. He was wearing clean clothes now, a soft green hoodie Daniel had picked up for him 2 days ago, and a pair of jeans that were still a little too big. His hair was freshly washed, and there was a smudge of syrup on his cheek. He didn't notice. He was smiling. Daniel stood at the stove, flipping another pancake onto the stack. He wore his usual weekend flannel shirt and looked more relaxed than he had in a long time. Every now and then, he glanced over his shoulder at the boy behind him, watching, without making it too obvious. There was something in the way Ethan sat, in the way he laughed quietly at his own joke under his breath, that told Daniel the boy was starting to feel safe. It had been a few days since the closet. Since the fear. Since the moment a small hand took hold of his in trust. They had talked more each day, slowly, carefully. Daniel hadn't pushed. He had given Ethan space when he needed it and company when he asked for it. They had played a board game on the living room floor. Watched cartoons until too late. Ethan had even helped Daniel plant some flowers outside, poking his finger into the soil and making a mess of it all, but laughing the whole time. And now, they were eating pancakes. "You ever put peanut butter on pancakes?" Daniel asked, turning from the stove with 2 plates in hand. Ethan wrinkled his nose. "That's weird. You'd be surprised," Daniel said, sitting down and sliding a plate in front of him. "Try it before you judge." Ethan considered, then took a tiny spoonful and smeared it onto the corner of his pancake like it might bite back. He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and looked up. "Okay, that's actually not bad." Daniel smiled. "Told you." They ate in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ethan looked up again, something more serious in his eyes. "Did you talk to anybody yet?" "About me?" Daniel set his fork down slowly. "Yeah, I did." Ethan's shoulders tensed. "I talked to a social worker. Her name is Marissa. I told her the truth, that I found you here, that you were left behind. She asked if I wanted to turn you into the system." And Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. Daniel leaned forward. "I said no." Ethan blinked. "You didn't?" "Nope. I told her I want to take care of you. For real. Not just for now." For a moment, Ethan didn't say anything. His eyes flickered away, like he didn't believe what he was hearing. "But, you don't know me. What if I mess up? What if I get in trouble?" Daniel smiled gently. "Then we'll deal with it. Together. That's what being a family means." The word, family, seemed to hang in the air for a second, as if Ethan had never heard it used like that before. His lip quivered just slightly, but he quickly wiped his mouth with a napkin and took another bite, avoiding Daniel's eyes. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay," Daniel echoed. Later, after breakfast, they stepped out onto the front porch. The sun was higher now, warming the wooden steps as birds flitted in the trees. Ethan stood beside Daniel, looking out at the quiet street, his small hand slipping into Daniel's without a word. Daniel looked down at him and squeezed gently. He didn't say anything either. They didn't need to. Because the boy who had once hidden in a dark closet, alone and forgotten, was now standing in the light, his hand held tightly in someone else's. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't waiting to be left behind. He was home.